I don't know about you, but I've been constantly hearing this term, the loneliness epidemic. The loneliness epidemic. Such a nice catchphrase with a ringtone, isn't it? It's on both the legacy media and YouTube, as if it's another pandemic that is spreading across the world. And you know what I think? I think it's another scam. And we have to carefully think about why they are trying to coin this term. Our society likes to push this idea that isolation is a bad thing, right? If you are aware, you might have noticed that we are constantly convinced by the social narrative that wanting to be alone is a problem. And the Japanese people call them hikikomori. In the US, those who isolate themselves are called recluses or basement dwellers. In Korea, it's called undunyong wetori, which means reclusive loner. And notice how all of them are a bit derogatory and contain a sort of resentment towards those who want to be left alone. Now, if you think about this closely, you might notice that the complete opposite is not talked about as much, right? In fact, it's not even an issue. You never hear about a problem with people being overly social. You know what I mean? They never raise concerns about meeting too many people or attending too many social events. People pleasing might be a word that people use, but you know, people pleasing is just a lighthearted coffee table conversation meant to be forgotten by a couple of hand waves, right? While self-isolation is a form of serious mental illness. So there's a drastic difference there. There's a big distinction. To me, I don't know why, but that bothers me a little bit. And as people who can think, right, actually think, we can't really help but ask the question, why? Why does society hate loners so much? And why are we constantly taught by mainstream media to fear solitude? And I think the reasons are quite simple, right? If you put yourself in the shoes of those who want power and control, the reason is quite simple. Because people comfortable with solitude can no longer be controlled by the mob. If people are okay with being alone and keeping to themselves, they cannot be influenced by mob mentality. And to individuals, mob mentality is a detrimental psychological phenomenon. But to those who want power, mob mentality is a necessary tool for control. Right? Because sheep herds are way easier to control than lone wolves. Mob mentality is also called herd mentality. And what it means is the loss of self-awareness and individual identity once you are mixed in with the crowd. So you start to think and act in a way different from what you would normally do when you are inside a group. And a simple example of this would be when you get on an elevator and everyone is facing backwards instead of the door, most people that get on the elevator would turn around and face backwards too after a couple of seconds. And if you think that you are intelligent enough to not fall victim to this herd mentality, you're very wrong, man. If you don't think so, well, look at history, right? Is slavery wrong today? Majority will say yes. Was it wrong back in the 1800s? What would the majority say? They would say it's not wrong. That is mob mentality. Same thing happened, right? Same thing happened all over the world, not just the US. And Korea had one of the longest unbroken chain of slavery in the world, if you remember the Bobby Lee video on YouTube. You see, when they choose a narrative and enough people believe in it, even dehumanization becomes okay. Imagine having Jim Crow law now, right? Imagine having separate bathrooms for white people and non-white people today. How does that make you feel? Disgusted? Outraged? You only feel disgusted and outraged because it is mob mentality. You feel that way because everybody else feels that way. I mean, nobody cared before the year of 1964 except Martin Luther King Jr. and those who were disenfranchised, right? But I digress too much here because the point I want to make is not about slavery or racial segregation. The point I want to make is that we are so dumb as a human species. There are so many cases in history where the mob was completely wrong, and yet we continue to choose to follow the herd, right? You know, it's just like that. It's just like what Hegel once said. Hegel said, we learn from history that we never learn from history. You know, have you ever stopped and wondered what ideas people are taking for granted today? If you are part of a mob, you can't think as an individual, so it's impossible to raise questions. But I bet there are so many narratives that you accept right now without question that you don't even realize, right? And let's go back to the beginning, okay? They keep telling us that it's the loneliness epidemic, that there is this rising number of single households who are responding that they are feeling lonely. They experience feeling loneliness. But why? Why are they telling us this? We have to ask ourselves the question. Why are we, as collective human beings, feeling nostalgic about the past? Why are people trying to convince us that we are lonely? Maybe another way to ask the question is this. What are they making us want? What are they making us seek? What do they want us to desire?